As someone who was reading the comic when it was coming out, it makes me happy to see how much love Invincible has gotten in recent years. I really do enjoy the giant train wreck adventure that is Mark's life leading up to the ending of the story. So just so we can add some more comic book videos onto the channel, let's have Invincible at his prime, aka Emperor Mark, go up against each member of the Justice League, breaking down Mark's chances at defeating some of the most iconic heroes in fiction. Thank you for clicking on the video, and if you like what you see, then I appreciate you checking out the other videos I have on the channel and subscribe for more in the future. And also, in case it wasn't already clear enough, there will be spoilers for the Invincible comic book. So if you don't want to hear them, this may not be the video for you. If you're still curious and want to hear my input, then by all means stay. Now let's go ahead and break down the rules for this matchup. So for the rules, I think it's pretty much fair and straightforward to understand, so here they are as follows. Rule 1, as we previously mentioned, Emperor Mark will be going 1v1 with each member of the Justice League. Each fighter will be at max health for each battle, and we're treating each match as a random encounter. Rule 2, the roster for the Justice League has fluctuated many times over the years, so to keep things simple, we're going to go with what I think is a standard roster of the team. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern Hal Jordan, Wally West, The Flash, Aquaman, and Martian Manhunter. So many comic book characters from DC have been members of the Justice League several times in their tenure as heroes, so if you don't like my selection for any number of reasons, that's 100% fine, but these are the ones I've chosen. Also, just to be clear, I'm primarily using the feats displayed from the current continuity of DC Comics, which is the Rebirth era all the way up to now in the current age of Dawn of DC and All In. Technically speaking though, majority of each character's history is now considered canon, but I'll keep it simple and just use fairly recent information for the Justice League. There will be times when I talk about certain relevant information from the New 52, but it's mainly due to it still being viable for discussion, such as characters and events that were introduced in the New 52 that have carried over into the current era. Rule 3, we're using the standard loadouts and traditional forms for each character, since almost all the members of the Justice League have forms or equipment that make them super OP compared to their normal versions. And I personally don't think it's fun to use those OP forms if they aren't the initial topic of the discussion. We could talk about some hypotheticals for a few characters, but the final decision is dependent on their standard forms. Like I said, pretty straightforward. But before we jump into our first matchup, let's discuss how strong Emperor Mark is to get a grasp as to what we're dealing with here. So when discussing Emperor Mark, we have to acknowledge that we're not given a bunch of concrete material to work with by the time the story reaches the final issue, but since we can 100% say that EOS Mark outscales all of his previous versions, I think we can make some fair assumptions that aren't too off base given his past feats. It's really not hard to comprehend his powers simply for the fact that Mark's abilities are pretty straightforward. He has the usual cocktail of superpowered abilities, super strength, speed, durability, endurance, the ability to fly, and his Viltrumite biology gives him a healing factor that allows him to survive near fatal injuries. However, I do think what sets Mark apart from the other Viltrumites in the story is undoubtedly his growth rate. Mark going from a Viltrumite who would be considered overall weak on average to someone who is relative to the strongest living Viltrumite when the story reaches its climax is very impressive, especially when considering that pretty much every Viltrumite besides his son and daughter, Tara and Mark Jr., and the children of Thrag are all older than him by hundreds to thousands of years, and Mark hasn't even hit his 30s yet when Thrag is brought down. The fact that in their second round of fighting, Mark was able to defeat Conquest, one of the oldest Viltrumites on his own, is incredibly impressive, especially when you remember that he wasn't at his peak yet. As I said earlier, I think it's safe to make a few assumptions about Mark since he outscales his previous forms. I think we can likely get Mark to large planet level in terms of his AP, since when he was younger, he needed a bunch of help and external factors to destroy a planet in the first place. Same thing can be said about his durability since he was trading blows against Thrag during their final battle. Unlike his strength stats, his speed isn't really too crazy to define. It's safe to put him in the FTL range for the simple fact of being able to fly across space. You could even put him at the massively faster than light category, but I don't think you should go any higher than that. I think overall, this assessment for Mark is pretty fair without putting him into higher tiers he or any other Viltrumite has ever consistently displayed in the story, nor implied by the time we reach the conclusion. So let's go ahead and jump into our first matchup. I think a good matchup to start with is Martian Manhunter, mainly because John is arguably the least popular member of our Justice League roster and doesn't get much time to show his overall abilities outside of the comics. And in a fight against Emperor Mark, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, Mark is getting completely overpowered here. For those who don't know, Martian Manhunter is an entirely different weight class when compared to Mark. Even with his most conservative interpretation, Martian Manhunter is bare minimum relative to Superman in strength, and has one of the strongest telepathic abilities in all of DC, which Mark has pretty much no answer to defend against. Unironically, Martian Manhunter having telepathy in his back pocket is automatic GG's. That's just a level of hacks that Mark can't punch his way out of due to primarily being a brute force character who has at several points in the story been outplayed by people using hacks abilities, such as several characters exploiting the Viltrumite frequency weakness or Ekstrom Levi's ability to send Mark into alternate dimensions for months at a time. This isn't to say that Mark doesn't have really strong willpower, because he does, but Martian Manhunter's telepathic abilities are so stupid strong that somehow he can literally manipulate the mind of Mr. Mixie, the literal 5th dimensional imp who has insane reality warping powers, to put it lightly. Also, since we're speaking of things Mark can't punch his way out of, Martian Manhunter can also just make himself intangible, rendering all of Mark's strikes virtually useless. So currently for his track record, Mark is at 0 wins and 1 loss. Next on the list, we have Aquaman, and for all the fist jokes that Arthur gets, he is without question one of the most underrated characters in all of DC. Although not as strong as him, again, Arthur is another of several characters who is somewhat relative to Superman in the main continuity, being able to land strikes onto and take strikes from the Man of Steel. He was also capable of doing the same thing against Wonder Woman as well, whom we'll discuss later in the video. Granted, he can still be overwhelmed depending on who exactly his opponent is, but he can at least hold his ground against a Doomsday possessed by the Great Darkness during Dark Crisis. Arthur has consistently been able to dodge Black Manta's lasers, but even if you want to argue that these beams aren't moving at light speed, Aquaman has on numerous occasions been able to keep pace with beings in those FTL to massively faster than light categories, giving him at least those levels of speed with his overall combat and reactions. Also in the current run for Aquaman, Aquaman has the ability to use hydrokinesis without the need of his trident, allowing for him to manipulate anything with water and moisture within it. Like, just to be blunt, Aquaman is straight up a bloodbender now being able to manipulate it on such a fine level, he can pull back any blood spilled from his body due to an injury, and, which I find even crazier, can rip the blood and water from his opponent's bodies. Now overall, Arthur's strength fluctuates a lot depending on the story, but given his feats, I don't think Mark is capable of effortlessly putting him down, and because Aquaman can literally rip all the water out of his body and has zero issues with killing his opponents, I don't think I can confidently say Mark will win this match. Again, this is another instance where Invincible is left in a situation where his brute force approach can't solve the problem for him, putting him at a win-loss rate now of 0 wins and 2 losses. And next is the Princess Themyscira, the underappreciated member of the Trinity, DC's leading lady, Wonder Woman. And even for the uninitiated, I don't think it's all too surprising to say that Wonder Woman is stupid strong. Funnily enough, she in overall function is incredibly similar to Mark and other Viltrumites in terms of being a powerful warrior who for the most part primarily uses brute force and martial skill rather than hacks. But her feats are just insane. She also has feats of taking powerful attacks from individuals like Doomsday and survived. Going by the Rebirth era's Great Race hierarchy, she is considered the 7th fastest being in DC, being ahead of Shazam and 2 other users of the Speed Force being Godspeed and Kid Flash, which automatically gives her at minimum massively faster than light speeds off rip. Her stamina and endurance is also insane since in recent continuity, Diana was able to survive a Sinister Six style jumping against some of the most prominent members of her rogues gallery, only to immediately enter a 1v1 with her near equal Grail while also taking their Omega Beams and came out as the winner. Absolute Power number 1 show that when it comes to overall power, Diana scales above the likes of John Kent Superman and Superboy. John Kent being somebody who during the Dark Crisis event was able to temporarily fight against some of the strongest villains in all of DC Comics, such as Darkseid and Doomsday, all at once, alone, while the villains were being possessed by the Great Darkness. And with all that being said, Mark is getting outboxed badly. In a fight of brute strength, she likely comes out on top, and it isn't a stretch to say that she is just a better fighter overall, and being faster than 2 Speed Force users is insane. Not to mention, I haven't even brought up her equipment like her bracelets, which can tank Darkseid's Omega Beams, and strikes from Grail's blade, which can pierce Shazam, her sword which can stab Darkseid, and her Lasso of Truth, which on several occasions has restrained numerous powerful entities. And that's just scratching the surface. Seriously, that rope is no joke. Mark loses this one, but it's less about hacks and more so about being just completely overpowered, which isn't new to the world of Invincible, bringing Mark's wins-loss rate to 0 wins and 3 losses. Next on our list is my personal GOAT of the Green Lanterns, Hal Jordan, and I think Hal and just Lanterns as a whole, speaking frankly, suffer outside the comics with our portrayal. A lot of people do not understand how insane the Green Lantern mythos is, so hopefully delving into Hal's stats might shed some positive light for them. Even the weakest lanterns on a normal basis travel across galaxies and conduct business on different planets as a literal routine part of their jobs, putting them as a whole in the FTL to massively faster in light range and speed. Hal Jordan, though, is on an entirely different level compared to the average lantern, since one of his best feats is being able to push his ring to the point that he almost entered into the Speed Force, the plane of existence that primarily only speedsters imbued with the energy of the Speed Force can access, and was able to keep pace with Light Ray, the fastest of the new gods. Not to mention that Hal on his own is strong enough to reverse jump a bunch of yellow lanterns being powered by the Fear Engine on Warworld, a sick and twisted device that extracts fear from innocent beings, allowing for the yellow lanterns to exceed their normal limits and reach 200% capacity. Not only that, but Hal is relative to Fear Engine Sinestro, who took off all the safeguards on his ring and boosted himself to over 1000% of his normal capabilities. But what's even crazier is that Hal is always restraining himself so he doesn't hurt innocent people with his max output, and when given the opportunity to go all out without having to worry about causing unnecessary destruction, nukes the planet Warworld with the energy of his raw willpower. This isn't an outlier, since Hal was able to box and defeat General Zod in an honest 1v1, one of Superman's most formidable foes, while he was being amped by the strength of two suns. That's right, folks, Hal Jordan beat one of the strongest Kryptonians in all of DC Comics while he was being fueled by two suns. And with all that being said, I just don't see Mark being able to put down Hal Jordan. Beating a Kryptonian roided out with two suns is just incredibly impressive, especially when on several occasions, Zod has given Superman a run for his money. That's now a win-loss rate of 0 wins and 4 losses. Let's continue now to our final 3 heroes. Flash wins, point blank period. We're not entertaining this. No way does Mark pull a W here. Wally West is the fastest person in the DC multiverse. Wally is the definitive top 1 when it comes to all things speed. We're talking about someone who moves so fast that they can gas out Superman casually. Literally stated that in a legit fight, Superman has no hope of landing even a single punch on him, and that Wally could kill everyone on Earth in the time it would take to sneeze. And, just like Martian Manhunter, he can phase through objects via vibrating his molecules, meaning even if Mark could actually land a punch, Wally could just have the punch phase through him and literally can use the same ability to negate Mark's durability and cause a bunch of damage. Wally is so powerful with the Speed Force, he could literally just do what Angstrom Levi did to Mark and just toss him into another dimension via the Speed Force. Just the energy of Wally and Barry running, not even at their top speed, was enough that the ruler of the New Gods, Highfather, thought it was coming from the Source Wall. There's truly is nothing for Mark to do here in a serious battle against Wally. That's a win-loss rate of 0 to 5. And now for the Dark Knight himself, we have Batman. And not gonna sugarcoat it, Batman is getting stomped. If you put Invincible in a room with a standard loadout Batman without any prep time, the battle is not ending in the Dark Knight's favor. But I must emphasize that this is only attributed because of rules 1 and 3, which I specified prior. Just so my overall thoughts aren't misinterpreted, I'll be blunt. Batman loses only because we're using just his standard loadout and not any of his higher tier equipment that he has had access to in the past. To be even more blunt, yes, I am nerfing Batman here, but that's only due to the nature of the rules I created. I am not saying it's impossible for Batman to defeat Mark. One of the most appealing things about Bruce is his effective planning with information and his large amount of resources that has allowed him to get the drop on some of the strongest beings in the universe, including his own allies. If we weren't treating this as a random encounter, Mark honestly would have no chance at winning. It would be child's play for Bruce to make a device that could take advantage of the Viltrumite frequency weakness that many other characters in Invincible have exploited in the past. It isn't even far-fetched to say Bruce could make his own non-lethal, but possibly even more potent strain of the Scourge virus if he had the relevant information, especially since in universe, there is an improved version of the strain, highlighting how the virus can be modified to create the exact result Bruce wants. Heck, the Justice Buster suit that allowed him to contend with some of the other core members of the Justice League that we previously mentioned can honestly give Mark a crazy fight in itself. But again, this is a standard loadout of Batman and we're treating it as a random encounter. I think it would be silly to have a Justice League video and not include the Dark Knight in the discussion, so now that brings Mark's win-loss rate of 1 win and 5 losses. Now let's discuss our final match. Let's be so for real here. you could upscale Mark to insanely high levels that he's never once displayed in the story or implied to be what he's possibly capable of doing, and it still wouldn't hold a candle to the Man of Steel. Every feat Mark has under his belt is something that Superman has either done before or scales above with other feats. Superman obviously scales above his own son Jonathan Kent, who, as previously mentioned, was able to temporarily brawl against multiple high-tier DC villains all at once while being under the influence of the Great Darkness, casually being able to stop Doomsday dead in their tracks when they were about to take out John. His heat vision is strong enough to clash against Darkseid's Omega Beams. Going by the Great Race hierarchy again, he is the 4th fastest character in DC, only being outpaced by the 2 main Flashes, Barry Allen and Wally West, and Eobard Thawne, the Reverse Flash. Superman, while in a weakened state, was able to tank a multi-planetary blast of electromagnetic energy that was stated by Cyborg to be so potent in radiation that it couldn't even be properly quantified. This on its own scales above Mark's highballed and speculated feats. At this point, I don't feel like I need to go on. Make no mistake, I haven't even gone over all of Superman's powers or all of his modern day feats because it's very unnecessary. Mark, on his best day, can't beat the guy who is the literal pillar of the superhero landscape. It's not glaze, it's genuinely just a fact that Mark cannot defeat the Man of Tomorrow. And that about wraps things up for this video, making Mark's total win-loss rate of 1 win and 6 losses. I want to be clear here and say that I don't hate Invincible. I genuinely thought of this video topic on a whim and thought it would be an interesting discussion. Mark simply suffers from facing out people who have years upon years of expanding lore and feats to add to their resume, while his story has been completed for almost a decade. I do want to say also that the roster I chose was not only because I think it's a solid and standard Justice League team, but also because I just like the characters. There are several heroes within the DC universe that Mark is 100% capable of beating without the need to highball his canon strength. But even more so, there's plenty of people who Mark can 100% lose to as well for several reasons. As mentioned prior, Mark has a glaring weakness against hacks-based opponents who can get around his high physical stats or simply getting blatantly overpowered. I do appreciate y'all for taking the time to watch the video. Let me know if you want me to do a part 2 with the Avengers crossing over into the Marvel Universe. I thought this was fun, so I have no problem diving into other verses if that's what you want to see. I hope you all have a great day and please stay safe. Peace.